Okay. Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Jamie Flinchbaugh. Jamie is the founder of J Flinch. He has helped purpose-driven leaders craft effective, resilient organizations at over 300 companies. Jamie has helped leaders in industries such as healthcare, utility, technology, consumer products, and professional services. He's the author of two books, and today we will speak about his latest book, People Solve Problems: The Power of Every Person, Every Day, Every Problem. Jamie, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Alan, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, what an amazing curriculum you have, helping over 300 organizations. I wonder if we could go back into your past and you tell us a little bit about your background. What is it that you study and what drove you towards business?
Well, I grew up in manufacturing, quite literally on the manufacturing floor. I worked for my father, but I started at 10 years old. I was in the company cleaning bathrooms, cleaning up the machine shop, and I learned how to run machine tools and write machine code. That got me interested in engineering, and I went on to become an engineer. But very quickly in parallel, I fundamentally just got curious about how organizations ran, whether it was my father running his company or companies that I became involved in, like Harley Davidson and then Chrysler. And I, I I still took my engineering education as a way to think critically. But I was really looking at why can't we move faster? Why can't we be more effective? Why can't people be more engaged? The sets of questions that really consumed me in the organizations I was in really led me down a path of how to build better organizations.
Okay, so you took a path of engineering and then you went into management, and that seems to be the regular path, the regular progression in a corporation, in basically any organization. But there are some engineers who don't like to go into management. They really like the engineering job. They like solving problems in the floor. They don't like managing people. I wonder if you have any comments on that, on people just sticking to what they like and not going into a management position.
Well, I support that strongly, and I do think many organizations need to provide career options for great technical resources to be able to advance without having to be consumed with people management. There's many great engineers out there that are extremely valuable to their firm, but the only way for them to move forward is to take on the management tasks, and then that consumes them, or they're not any good at it.
Right.
So they actually cease to become as valuable, and they have this choice between advancement and relevance. In the end, I think people are best when they're working on problems that they're passionate about. For me, while I was a mechanical engineer, I love engineering problems and I love problem solving. But what I got passionate about was the organizational effectiveness problems were very complex. They didn't have a deterministic answer, where you could say, what's the strength of this beam to hold up this thing? Right, that's a deterministic kind of problem. Most organizational performance challenges don't have a single answer, but are just as complex, just as nuanced, and still really benefit from a systems and analytical viewpoint on how to get the most out of them.
Okay, well, let's go into the topic of the book, People Solve Problems. What led you to write this book?
Well,
Excuse me, can you also mention real fast the previous book that you wrote before this one as well?
yeah, so I think that'll be a good framing. So the first book I wrote, which was actually 15 years ago, was called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean. And it was really based on the fact that my consulting at the time was really focused on this philosophy and set of practices called lean that uh, would help organizations of a wide range of spectrum be more effective. And so we trained people in this. We taught people, coached people, consulted. And so the Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean included problem solving, but as part of this sort of larger lean aspect. Well, as I work with organizations over the years, I realize a few truths, if you will, or at least observations. One, organizations, whether they're using lean or not, everybody's solving problems. And so while lean might be a better way to solve problems, it's a challenge everybody has, and they have a constant maturity that they have to go on as a company, as an organization, to get better and more consistent how they do that. The second observation is that if I go look at the 5 best problem solving organizations I've ever seen, they all use different tools, but they also use some of the same tools that some of the 5 worst problem solving organizations I've observed. And so the tools aren't the magic. The tools aren't really what differentiates things. And then third, if I go look at what's out there for people to get better at this, the training, the books, and the other things, most of them do focus on the tools. So they focus on the things that, in my opinion, aren't the differentiating factor. And so I really felt like this was a high leverage topic for a lot of different organizations that not really anybody was writing about. And so that's what led me to explore this, to stoke my curiosity, and ultimately, a book comes out the other end.
And tell us about, for a second, your experience as a writer, because it's a complete set of skill to be working, managing people, and advising and consulting. And the other thing is just to actually sit down and write a book.
Yeah, it is. And I think first you need a reason, you need a purpose. I think purpose, and this is what I say about organizations too, everything emanates from purpose. And the same is true with book writing. If you don't have a really clear purpose that drives you to write the book, it's probably not going to get done. For me, writing isn't natural. It doesn't come easy. I don't write just for the fun of it. I actually find I have to write in a different environment than most of my work, because the mental energy is very different, and so both books I largely would write in locations that didn't remind me of the rest of the work that I was doing. It allowed me to kind of tap into a different mental rhythm. But writing has always been an important piece of my work, even though it didn't come naturally. It's how I clarified my thinking. And so whether it was a client sometimes I used to write a column for many years, and so the topics would sometimes be client questions. They would ask me a tough question. I wouldn't have an articulate answer. I'd hop on a plane, start to think through the problem, write a crisp, well-packaged column, which would then get published. But now I also had my clear thinking for that question. And so even with this topic around people solve problems, I kind of say, first and foremost, I write for myself as a process to clarify what I think, what my opinion is, what my teaching points are. And so I get value out of it before we even get to publishing, because it's how I sharpen my own thought process.
Right. I have heard many authors say that the only way they can figure out what is it that they're thinking is by writing it down. Otherwise, it's just random ideas floating in their head, and until they are written down, then they don't know how those ideas connect to each other.
Exactly. And I think there's a discipline in exploring an idea, connecting the dots, going deep, researching other things connected to that topic that just helps clarify. I can say a lot of things to almost any question, but what do I really believe? And the writing process helps put all those pieces together so that my belief system on the topic is at least well framed.
Well, looking at your book, I see that you have divided it in 4 segments. Can you just tell us what those segments are and maybe a short description of each one of those?
Yeah, so I think I kind of put the tools aside, right? So
Right.
that clearly does matter in problem solving. But and the first iteration of the book, it actually had tools still in it. And I decided, well, I'm writing about the fact that these other things matter. So let me just completely put the tools aside and make this book tool agnostic. So I don't really write about the tools other than to say that they still matter, and I'm not really going to talk about them. So then I talk about the 4 other areas that I think matter greatly. One is the behaviors. So comparing this to the tools as a contrast, if you go to the gym and somebody teaches you how to use the equipment, those are the tools. But if your challenge is that you never even get to the gym, that's your behavior. And so that's what the behavior section is about, both behaviors that have to come to life while you're solving the problem, but also sometimes are the behaviors that get you up to the starting line, that surround problem solving as a whole. So call that the culture, call that the behaviors, call that the principles, but it's the stuff that the tool can't make you do. So that's an important section. Then we talk about the capabilities, and the capabilities are probably what intersect with the tools most directly. And you could say practice the tools, and the skill will develop, the capabilities will grow. And I generally believe that to be true most of the time. But there's also a lot of times where the skills happen, I like to say, off the page. Right? You may not be using structured problem solving, but the skills still matter. So being able to frame a good problem statement often is a skill that we bring to problem solving before anybody pulls out a template, their very
Mm.
first template. And so it's still a skill that yes, we train people how to do that when we're pulling out tools and templates, but we start utilizing that skill beforehand. And so those skills matter with or without a tool. I talk about the role of coaching, which I believe is the single greatest leverage point for building good problem solving in the organization. I did have this sort of almost as a subsection to the next topic, but I have so much to say about coaching, and I think it's such a high leverage point that it made its own section. And one of the reasons it's such a high leverage point is that every individual is different. We've been learning how to solve problems individually since we were infants, right? Just how do I get across the room is a problem solving exercise. And now nobody taught us how to solve problems, but we have our own personal experiences. We have the education, we have what a company or a job might have taught us. And so it's a very, very personal learning journey. And so that's why I think in many cases, training is insufficient, because my habits, my strengths, my weaknesses, my blind spots is a very personal thing. It's based on my entire life history of solving problems day in and day out. And so coaching helps people get from where they are to where they could be next. And that's why I think it's such a powerful tool to help improve coaching. And then the last section is on the role of the leader. What can leaders do to help make problem solving better in their organization, from architecting their system to just framing problems for teams better? And so in many ways, while the book isn't entirely written just for leaders, I did write this with the idea that I'm going to help leaders drive better problem solving in their organization, and so really try to get articulate about that particular challenge in that last section.
In regards to coaching, how does an individual decide who will be a good match? You have, would it be the person immediately above you? It could be a colleague. It could be someone 2 or 3 levels higher up. It could be the person who offers to help. How does one determine this is going to be my coach?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I have to say I don't have a great algorithm for that. Maybe that's my next book, but a topic I have to figure out better. I will say this. One is I think every employee should be no more than 1 degree separated to access a coach. Now, the easiest way to do that is that every manager is a coach, and then you've achieved that automatically. Um, but sometimes, the manager isn't the best suited to be the coach for various different reasons, whether it's the job description or their mindset, etc. I do think someone has to respect the individual they're coaching. Um, if you look at it as a way to fix the other person because you consider them broken, it's very hard to coach effectively because you don't come at it from an attitude of coaching, of support, of respect, and you come at it as almost an approach of the enemy that I have to overcome you as an individual. Not a good, not a good starting point. I think trust between the two parties is super important, uh, particularly trust in intention. What is the intent behind the person coaching? But also intent of or the trust in the process that I'm willing to go along with the process. And I think another important ingredient in finding the right person is essentially making it overt, meaning making sure that we agree that you are indeed coaching me, and that both parties kind of, I don't want to say contract, implies a very formal structure, but they agree that you are indeed coaching me. I think going into the coaching relationship, it is very hard to know for sure whether this will work or not. But here's how I kind of measure, or at least evaluate whether or not it's a good fit. And it takes getting started to know to get to this point. But one, if the person you're coaching is following through on the things that you agree to, if they're actually doing what you recommend or what you agreed to, it demonstrates that they value the coaching and the next step. And so it's an indicator. It's not a purely correlated metric, but if they are following through, it means at least they value it enough that they want to be ready for the next conversation. And I think that's a positive indicator. I think the other positive indicator is that they're talking about it to others. They are sharing. They may not be advocating, oh, you should get coaching too, but they're at least talking openly about the coaching that they're getting, the insights that they've had, or the value that they've achieved. I think when they talk about it, it means they're comfortable with it. And I think those are good observable indicators that the relationship is working uh, um, from a relationship standpoint.
Okay. Okay. So people solve problems, and we spoke about people solving problems within the range of capabilities that they have. However, we have things like COVID-19, who all of a sudden stretch demands skills out of all that we don't have. For example, the server now having to be like a security guard, asking for people to put on a mask and then getting punched in their face if people don't agree with their commands. I wonder how, I mean, of course, it's all about people, about how we adapt, but in circumstances that are way beyond our set of skills, how can people quickly adapt to the new to the new reality?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the reasons that makes problem solving so powerful is to help with the resilience of the organization for the problems they do not yet know will occur. Whether those are, a pandemic or staffing shortages or supply chain disruptions, which are problems that I was working with people on today alone. So, it starts with framing the problem well. Framing the problem means, getting a good problem statement. What is the gap we're experiencing, and what is the part that we can control, right? So in March of 2020, there seemed like very little that we can control. And in fact, there was, right? We couldn't control the pandemic or restrictions. Most organizations very quickly made decisions to go work remotely where they could. But what were the parts we could control? Was it about prioritization? Was it about our own work process? I mean, for me, going from traveling 3 to 4 weeks a month to doing 100% of my work from a home office meant, well, I have a very different morning routine. And can I focus on making that as effective as possible and efficient as possible so that I can set up my day for success? It might have been a very small leverage point, but it was the part that I could control, that I could influence. And so how we frame problems to set up the work to go forward is super important. I think also defining the conditions of satisfaction around that. This is how leaders frame problems. Just contrast March 2020, when we sent lots of people home and said, okay, new safety protocols, work from home if you can, et cetera. These were very broad solutions that were not nuanced much at all. But urgency was more important than right? So employee safety and urgency and overdoing it was all okay, but we didn't have time to be nuanced about it and figure out. Now, as people are coming back to work, or back to the office, I should say, some did very early, some over time, some are just gearing up to do this. I'm watching some people not, I'll say, still make the wrong balance between those things. They're trying to make big decisions that cover lots of people fast in an unnuanced way. Well, that's the wrong prioritization. There wasn't a lot of urgency. A lot of people were working effectively remotely. So let's get it right. Let's figure out the nuances. Let's solve the micro problems that occur along the way. And there's a different balance in that problem solving. And so this is the role of the leader in a lot of cases, is framing the problems in a way that allows us to understand what's important: urgency, collaboration, completeness, speed. These are all different variables that we must weigh. And sometimes a 20% solution today is more valuable than a 100% solution 3 months from now. Well, what does this situation call for? That's in part the leader's job, is to strike that balance. Because, as an engineer, as we talk about my engineering background, a lot of engineers will always work towards a 100% solution, but sometimes a 50% solution tomorrow and a 20% solution today is better, more valuable than a 100% solution sometime in the future. And so in facing these rolling concerns, supply chain shortages, staffing shortages, et cetera, dealing with that, framing them properly, focusing on the part we can control and influence. That's how problem solving allows us to get power back and do something about the condition we find ourselves in.
Wow. One more question. This one is in regards to maintaining a problem-solving culture in the organization. Of course, in organization, that's the main thing that you want. We want to face new problems, challenges, and solve them and continue going for as long as we can. But how does an organization deal with other kind of cultures? Like we have so much, let's say, the culture of, let's say, diversity and inclusion, gays, straight, ageism, the boomer generation versus the millennials, or religious differences, political differences. We all want to work together and focus on problem solving, but sometimes our own personal culture interferes with that, and we want somehow to make it cohesive so everyone can be happy and still focus on the corporation.
Yeah, so I think a couple of key points. One is every leader has to take some responsibility for their localized culture.
Hmm.
Everything we do, say, every decision we make, every reaction we have affects the culture. The culture is a product or a byproduct of people's experiences. And as leaders, we are continuously giving people experiences. Which meetings do I show up for? Which meetings do I not show up for? What words do I use? Which words do I avoid? How do I react when there's a problem? How do I react when someone asks for help? All of these are experiences that we that affect the culture, and we as leaders have to be deliberate about that. I like to say leaders have a financial plan, they have a strategy plan, they have a resource plan, they have a plan for everything. If culture is so important, they should also have a culture plan. And so I work with leaders to be deliberate about their culture plan. Now, coming back to the core of your question around, well, what about these other cultural goals and how they come at you? I think this is where prioritization, focus, and having a plan is quite handy. For example, inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually a lot of things, right? They all relate, but there's different cultural elements around different aspects of that. Well, inclusion is how I'm involved in the day-to-day work. Am I a party to the decisions? Am I a party to the work, or am I simply invited to the meeting after the decision is made? Well, problem-solving behavior is two important problem-solving behaviors. One is around collaborate. I like to call problem-solving a contact team sport, and another is around creativity. Well, we get more creativity with diversity. In order to get inclusion in the collaboration, or in the creativity, we need to collaborate. So you start to see that getting teams together, or getting into pairs together, getting people together to collaborate and creative problem solving is also a pathway to inclusion. And inclusion is a pathway to better creativity. It starts to become a leverage point as a leader. So I don't want to say look for the twofers, but you look for where these things come together, converge, and where the leverage is as a leader. Where can I focus and have an impact and actually make this stuff come to life? So it's not competing, it's actually complementary.
Wow, Jamie, there's so much food for thought in your book and the lessons that you're sharing with us. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's people solve problems, the power of every person, every day, every problem. They can find the book on most booksellers, Amazon included, and they can find me at jflinch.com. There's also a book page there that'll take you to the different places you can find it, or you can find me at LinkedIn. There's not a lot of competition for the name Jamie Flinchbaugh, so you can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily.
I find you very easy. Jamie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.